Hello and welcome to our plenary session, panel discussion 2. This panel discussion is titled Pay Whakapuranga Functional Family Therapy Cross Generations. My name is Bill and I'll be chairing today's session. Before we start, I'll run you through how the session will work and then I'll hand over to our panel. If you have any questions during the session, please type them into the Q&A button on the right. If you have any technical difficulties, please use our live support button at the top of the screen. You can view this screen on large if you click on the arrows in the top right of your screen. I'll first introduce the panel and then at the end of their panel discussion, we'll work through the Q&As that have been provided by members and people attending today's session. Our panel members today are from Youth Horizons, which is a national charitable trust working to improve the lives of children and young people who are dealing with behavioural, emotional, mental health and developmental issues. Youth Horizons' mission is to provide evidence-based and biculturally focused programs that create better futures for rangatahi who are impacted by conduct problems. Our panel members today are Liesl Niania-Sharples, Cynthia Dash, Jennifer Garton, Juliet Eritje and Pita Ngaru. So I'll now hand over to our panel to start our discussion today.
E tuatahi ko te wehi ki te atua te kuputi matatanga ko te whakahona rei tō tātou kingi, a kingi tu heitia ko ia noho noho maina I runga I tōna tau matatapu. Mei te inoina hoki ki aia I te wā hingaro ki uwhia mai rā I tōna kākahua ta whai ki runga ki aia, ki runga I tōna whare tapu, ta whare riki ta kāhui riki nui tonu, ki runga tahi ia tātou tēnei e pai nei. Me mihi ka tika ki ngō tātou mate huhua e takoto haere nei runga I o tātou marae maha, haere ngā mate oki atu. Tātou tēnei ngā mahu e tanga I ho ngō tātou mātū, ngō tātou tupuna, ngā kanohi ora o rātou mā, huri noa, huri tai a whio I tō tātou motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Anau mai ki tēnei wāhanga o pai whakatupuranga, ko ia tēnei e whakātātu nei ki a koutou katoa. Hei tīmata I tō tātou wāhanga ka tika, kia tuku atu I tātou I te tehi wāhanga ki te atua, mana tātou e manaki, e tiaki, no reira ki aino I tātou. Tapu e I hoa e tatua e whakakine I te rangi I te whenua I tō aroha noa, e te kai ho mai o te rangi Māria me te aroha. Tēnei rā mātou au pononga, te koropiko nei ki mua I tō warawara I tēnei haora o tēnei rā. E tuku whakamoimiti atua I mātou kia koe mō tēnei rā ko homani e koe kia mātou. E te atua hei noi tēnei kia koe, ki uwhia mai rā ko tau kākahua te whai ki runga I te pani I te pawaru talawakore, ngā tanga te māuiwi tiana I ngai kāinga I ngā hohipera maha, kia whakapiki he atua I te kaha te ora te māramatanga ki runga I a rātou, ki runga tahi a mātou tēnei e pai nei. Ka inu e toi mātou kia koe tatu e runga te ngō tapu o tāu tama, ai hukaraiti tō mātou kei whakaora. Āmine. Nō reira tēnā koutou, kia ora no tātou katoa.
Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Ngāti Kahununu te iwi, ko ngai te kikiri o te rangi tōku hapu, no Takapau ahau, ko Liesl Niania-Sharples tōku ingoa. Tēnā tātou.
Ia te aule awa man whānua le tere, te whatalo whātum whawhiroa ia tūri pa ia man maro le aso. Tēnā koutou e te whare, ko Ngāti Hamua, ko Ngāti Pākia te iwi, ko Cynthia Dash tōku ingoa, ko Principal Advisor Pasifika Takumahi, ki ora koutou.
Tēnā koutou, ko Ingarihi, ko Airihi, ko Kotarani, ko Te Mana Ngā Iwi, ko Olin, tōku whānau, ko Jennifer Garton, tōku ingoa, kia ora koutou.
Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou, ko Ngāti Wai, Ngāpuhi, Ngā Iwi, ko Patuharu Kiki, Ngāti Taka, Ngā Hapu, ko Juliet Eritje, tōku ingoa, kia ora koutou.
Ko teinu I te waka, ko kario I te maunga, ko te kakawa te popo tupuna, ko Ngāti Patupo, te karanga hapu, ko Ngāti Mahuta, Ngāti Hikairo, Ngāti Tuahi, Ngāti Mahanga, a ngā iwi, kāwhia moana, kāwhia kai, kāwhia tangata, tēnā koutou, ko tōku ingoa, ko Pita te Ngaru. Kia ora tātou, and welcome to this Pai Whakatupuranga kōrero that we have today. So firstly, I'd like to start off around a little bit of whakapapa. As we know, whakapapa is really, really important for our people and for any program that we have within our organisation, making sure that people understand its whakapapa and the essence of our kaupapa that we have. So let me start back about 13 years ago. The whakapapa relationship between Youth Horizons and FFT LLC in America started with our clinical director heading across over to the States to the Blueprints Conference. It was there that a relationship was formed, and we brought over the CE of FFT LLC America to Aotearoa to come and meet and to start discussions around whether we wanted to have a look at a evidence-based model coming into Aotearoa. After an agreement had started with FFT LLC, we then started to bring them back over to Aotearoa, and the photo that you see there is one of our marae within Ngāti Maniapoto at Kahotea. The tupuna whare is Whatihua. It is there with our kaumātua of Waikato, of Tainui, of Ngāti Maniapoto, Ngāti Hinetu, that the relationship was solidified and that the FFT kaupapa was brought into Aotearoa. So the kaupapa was brought in through our marae, through our kaumātua. And so the whakapapa between FFT and Youth Horizons Kia Kuawai is a strong one of 13 years. The organisation is really committed to having this strong relationship in our organisations that we have. And it was Doug Kopp that came to speak with our YH Youth Horizons board stakeholders, supported by kaumātua. And of course, later on, the founder of FFT LLC, Dr. Jim Alexander, came to Aotearoa also to come and meet with our whānau here. So I'm going to be crossing over now to Juliet and handing it over to Juliet for a kōrero.
Kia ora. Doing things, as you've heard from Pita, the right way, right from the beginning, readied the soil for future growth by ensuring that the model developers knew from the very beginning that in order for their model to come into Aotearoa, it needed to be right for Māori. From here, they understood the expectations on them and enabled us to take the next steps in relation to this pilot. So within this pilot, there was a decision to weave three frameworks together, 2 Indigenous and 1 Western based, and align that with 3 adaptations of FFT. So we had the coming into adulthood, the child welfare and the standard adaptation, all woven into the same delivery, and then working collaboratively with 3 government agencies, being Corrections, Oranga Tamariki and the police. And as I'm sure you could imagine, this had its challenges: 3 stands of knowledge, 3 adaptations, and 3 slightly large government organisations, coupled with an NGO and an international model developer. For me, in this program, it's probably been one of the best examples of collaboration and partnership that I've ever worked in. We have within our group the fact that every opinion is equally valuable. Everybody's knowledge is taken on board and listened to. And we are solely focused as a collaboration on wanting more for our whānau and rangatahi, for their future, for their ambitions, for their care in our community. And it's largely underpinned by the values that we hold as an organisation of aroha, manaakitanga, wairuatanga and whanaungatanga. And by standing by these values and working well together, we've enabled progress. And my colleagues are now going to share a little bit more about the deeper detail of the model and how it all weaves together. So I'm going to hand over to Jen.
Kia ora, Juliet. So this next slide is about functional family therapy. And functional family therapy, as Peter mentioned, was founded in the 1970s by Jim Alexander. And you can see on the slide some of the model values and characteristics, which over the years, 13 years as an organisation, we've seen really link quite closely to our own values. So some of those are around respectfulness. So we bring empathy, kindness, compassion, and humility into our clinical relationships with family. We're non-judgmental, so we acknowledge the dignity within individuals and families as we seek to try and understand problem dynamics. We're strength-based. We respond in mana-enhancing ways to build hope and build motivation for change. We're relational, so we explore interpersonal dynamics through a relational versus an individualistic lens. And we really believe that family is integral to long-term positive change. We seek to have a balanced alliance with family members, so we bring authenticity and integrity into our clinical relationships. And we kind of come in trying to build relationship first, connection, understanding. It's really important to the approach that we take and the way that we work with whānau. We seek to match with whānau, so we want to uphold family structure, traditions, values, and culture. And we're specific. We are individualized. We create bespoke intervention plans developed individually for each family. So those are just some of the characteristics of FFT and the approach we take to working with whānau. I'm going to hand back over to Pita to talk a little bit more about the Whaitaki Whakauranga whānau framework specifically. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So the Whaitaki Whakauranga framework, Whaitaki Whakauranga whānau sort of translates to the chasing for the purpose of the well-being of family. So the framework was started about, not long after the arrival of FFT into Aotearoa, so about 13 years ago, when we looked at implementing a cultural framework into Pai Whakatupuranga. One of the first things that we did was that we went to go and see the Waikato Tainui College of Research and Development here in Waikato at Hopu Hopu, so our local tribal college that we have up there, and spoke with the academics up there around how this might work and any feedback that they had on what we had already created. After speaking with the college and asking them whether any other people or any other organisation had come to them with anything like this before, and they said, come through. And so when they saw the takarangi that you see there, the takarangi, of course, is a very ancient symbol of our people. It talks about balance. It talks about the beginning of the Māori world from te kore, from the nothing through to te ao marama, to the world of light. It talks about Ranginui and Papatuanuku being separated. So it is a very ancient symbol that our people have been using for eons. The bits that you see in between there, the waiwai pākura, which talk about the feet of the pūkeko. So the pūkeko is a swamp hen. So it's a bird that lives in the swamp, and you often see its footprints in the mud in the swamp, and you never ever see them walking backwards. It's always about walking forward. The other name that we have for those are the ritorito, or they are the young shoots of the flax plant that we have here in Aotearoa. So the takarangi, a very ancient symbol, is the taonga or the visual that we use about movement. It's about movement. It's about moving through Whaitaki Whakauranga whānau with the words that you see there that guide each of the therapists as they start moving through the framework. And it's also a bit like a game of snakes and ladders. So they don't have to just move from one to the other. They can go back and restart again if they need to. Perhaps there's a new whānau member who has joined the session, and so it's going back again to whakatau, to bring them into the session, and to whakawhanaungatanga, to have build a relationship with part of the whānau. So that's just a little bit about the Whaitaki Whakauranga whānau framework. I'm now going to hand it over to Cynthia Dash. Tēnā koe, Cynthia.
Kia ora mātua, whakataimoda whanua. So in selecting an appropriate model that would integrate specific protocols and values to increase effective engagement and therapeutic treatment with specific families, one of the things that we did was we reviewed the literature extensively, And then I led out a process of community consultations with specific leaders in the social service sector as well as in the mental health sector. Also talked quite extensively with our Mātua Pasifika at the time, Tōwha Tupea Asiaba Tupea. And from that consultation, it was determined that the Uputaua therapeutic approach was the appropriate Pacific model to integrate into Pai Whakapuranga. So Dr. Byron Sayuli's model was selected as we felt that it aligned closely with FFT principles and had academic rigor and precedence in community application in New Zealand, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, and the Cook Islands. The Uputaua framework is a pan-Pacific model that recognizes many of the cultural and spiritual protocols that are central to Pacific communities. Reflected in the model. And while the model originated from Samoan Foundation, it also recognizes the uniqueness of Pacific identity that encompasses different languages, traditions, and ways of being for Pacific ethnic groups. So significantly, Pacific people share a strong heritage that often draws them together, and we know this. So thinking about the proverb on the slide, the Samoan proverb, the toloa will fly anywhere, but it will return to the waters which it was born. This speaks back to our cultural foundation in terms of our journey. The framework, in our view, locates not only the developer's personal journey with his grandmother and family, but it also opens the space for anyone and everyone else to locate their own journey, utilizing these different areas of the model, the cultural elements and the pillars of well-being, which is what the therapeutic side of it entails. The various components of Uputaua, we feel, aligns closely with FFT and aims to enhance FFT meetings with Pacific families. It provides a conceptual approach and a guiding reference to assist therapists to engage culturally and sensitively with Pacific people while maintaining FFT principles. Uputaua portrays the engagement and treatment process using spiritual, cultural, and therapeutic processes that are representative of Pacific cultural values. The key components of Uputaua comprises of spirituality, culture and custom, and the 3 steps of engagement and pillars of well-being, which I noted earlier. Going back to briefly just noting what each one represents. Spirituality acts as the governing that endorses safety and protection when engaging Pacifica clients, the maintenance of divine connections that were observed prior to Christianity, and it's very essential to the identity of Pacific people. Culture and custom is recognized as our foundations. It recognizes that while we are in different countries and the way that we do culture has changed over time, but the values and the meaning remain the same. The dimension of culture also helps us to renegotiate our identity as those that have migrated, like the toloa bird, who has flown away from his nest and is now traveling, but still have strong connections back home. The steps of engagement are really recognizes and identifies the essential place and space given to honoring the knowledge and the fact that the Pacific young people and the families that we are working with have their own knowledge and expertise, and we need to give space to that they really are at the center of this, and they lead the journey for us, and we are there to walk alongside them, but they are the expert in finding the solutions to what we say to fulfill or massage the challenges that they may be facing. So in the weaving process of weaving Uputaua into FFT, as well as Whakapuranga and the way it comes together, we had to consider the way it integrates to make sure that the Pacific strands stands out as the Pacific strand alongside the FFT and the Whaitaki Whakaoranga whānau strands, but that each of those remain as its own individual and unique strand, that it doesn't lose itself in the weaving. In fact, what we found was that it actually enhances the mana of the other two strands in the same time as it actually enhances the Uputaua strands. It operates and recognizes the value that it has a space. And we also take note of the fact that too many times specific models of well-being has been so integrated we cannot even see it anymore. It has been taken over. But what we are showing in the weaving of Uputaua within Pai Whakatupuranga is that it remains unique and it remains critical, but it also can align, which is why it's not only that it's Pan-Pacific, but that it's working across culture and with Māori and essential Eurocentric approaches. That Whakaoranga whānau and FFT are not only that it aligns with Uputaua, but it also actually strengthens it. And then likewise, Uputaua, in the process of weaving, actually aligns and strengthens the other ones. So we really do believe that the match and the fit for purpose of Uputaua for connecting in and aligning with the other two frameworks is a perfect match. There is a good feeling, and there was a good feeling right from the beginning. There is no tension or feeling like we are being undermined in the journey, but we actually in the journey have felt like had a really good feeling about it, and all the communities in the process of developing the ethnic specific practice guides that we're working on right now have talked to how Uputaua has highlighted who they are as Tonga and Niue Cook Island communities in the process. And so we're really excited about what's to come. So that will be it for now. And I'll hand it over now to Liesl.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Cynthia. Te Huarahi o Te Rangatahi is our clinical manual, which intertwines Whaitaki Whakaoranga whānau and Uputaua together with the FFT model. The manual weaves together information on the functional family therapy model of treatment, as well as the Whaitaki Whakaoranga whānau framework. This includes resources such as whakatauki, along with deeper explorations into the meaning of each kupu and how they align with FFT, and te ao Māori, and in practice when working with whānau. The Pacifica Cultural Framework, as Cynthia has mentioned, Uputaua, provides an overview of the Uputaua therapeutic approach. It includes those foundations and principles and how they align with FFT, and guidance around the steps of engagement and pillars of wellbeing for therapists, as well as proverbs and values from a Pacifica worldview. This manual has become a resource for therapists to refer back to time and time again. Kia ora, Pita.
Kia ora tātou. So the Pai Whakatupuranga manual, Te Huarahi o Te Rangatahi, is an internal document that we've created for our therapists. During the launch of this taonga that we have, it was noted that FFT, Uputaua, and Whaitaki Whakaoranga whānau were all woven together into one book. And of course, then the whakatauki or the kōrero tongikura of Pōtatau Te Whirowhiro, who recited this in 1858, ko tahi anō te kōwhao te ngira I kuhunai te miro mā, te miro whiro me te miro mangu, which translates to there is but one eye of the needle through which the red, black and the white threads must pass. And so when we have a look at the Pai Whakatupuranga manual, Te Huarahi o Te Rangatahi, the book or the manual itself is that needle, and those three threads, FFT, Uputaua and Whaitaki Whakaoranga whānau, are woven within that book. And so with our therapists, the hope is, and the vision is that therapists use the book as the needle and go through and start things together with our family and reconnecting our families and using the taonga of Uputaua, the taonga of Whaitaki Whakaoranga whānau and the taonga of FFT, which align really, really well, as Cynthia has spoken about, with both cultural frameworks and weaving those things together with our whānau. Nō reira, tēnei ka mihi rā ki a tātou. I'm going to hand it, I think it's back over to you again, Liesl.
Yes, yeah, kia ora. So supervision and support. Supervision has been a combination of 6 noho marae, fortnightly team supervision and monthly supervision with the practice leader. It has been provided to support therapists to learn the deeper meaning of each waiwai pakura within a te ao Māori context, and to increase the cultural awareness and cultural responsiveness of therapists overall. We have utilised Whaitaki Whakaoranga whānau as a reflective practice tool. So through journaling and checking in as a team, therapists have shared reflections on what those words mean to them. And also we have looked, there are 2 parts to this reflective practice. Firstly, therapists reflect on how various kupu relate to their own process and preparation when meeting with whānau for the first time. So, and secondly, therapists reflect on what they might be doing in the room with whānau. An example of this is if we took the kupu whakatau, a therapist could consider, how do I settle whakatau myself before I go and meet with this whānau? Examples of what that could look like could be them calling the referrer to ask, first of all, for more information, Googling the address. It could be just sitting in the car and practicing mindfulness breathing before going into session. Secondly, how will I create space to engage in whakatau with the family? So the therapist could call ahead, they could take kai, remove shoes, offer karakia as a way of starting the hui, use some te reo, just those are some examples. Kia ora, I'd like to pass it to Jen.
So, kia ora, Liesl. So it's been really important for us that we approach the use of these 2 cultural taonga in a way that really integrates the learning and the knowledge for therapists. And so we've been thinking a lot and doing a lot of work in terms of treatment planning. So when it comes time for the treatment planning of sessions with whānau, we are asking therapists to incorporate their thinking around the various kupu, the various waiwai pakura or the concepts within uputawa into their treatment planning templates. We've been using our case noting systems to capture any of the mahi that has been done, which has been inspired by those waiwai pakura or uputawa concepts, and kind of use case noting to plan for and think about how those might play out in future sessions. And then finally, we have been bringing those kupu, bringing those concepts into our clinical supervision sessions, bringing them into our cultural supervision sessions, and kind of talking about and reflecting on those and trying to integrate them more fully into our practice. So it's been a really great journey, and this slide shows you the team. Some of those team members have moved on to other spaces, but that was the team at the time of the manual launch, and just some quotes from some families that we've been working with to date. So it's my great pleasure to introduce a video that we're going to be looking at next. It's a video kind of illustrating the Whaitaki Whakaoranga whānau framework. So I hope you enjoy.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think we had a bit of a technical issue with the video there at the end. That was just a really brilliant presentation, and thank you so much for taking the time to prepare and to present to us today. We're now moving to some Q&As from those who are attending the session today. And thank you for those who have put some questions through already, and please feel free to put more questions through on just on the right of your screen there. Our first question up is asking whether or not the frameworks include restoration or healing as part of that, and what does cultural supervision look like? I'll open it up to the panel and let the panel decide who might be best to respond.
Probably Pita and Liesl.
Liesl, would you like to start with some of the cultural supervision?
Yep, sure. So cultural supervision, because most of our team is non-Māori, we've had 1 or 2 Māori therapists, so it's kind of like matching to who's in the room and how we might do things. But we pretty much always begin with karakia and a check-in. So check-in using the waiwai pakura, so that the therapist, by checking in with them constantly, they're able to embed those kupu into their way of being. And over time, it's just become like, now with our sessions, everybody knows the deeper meaning of each of those kupu and they can talk to them really well. So that's a big part of what we do. And then along the journey, you know, we've played games to learn the kupu. We share case stories about what this might look like and the way that we work. And other things, I guess, because cultural supervision, you know, it's not just one thing. We know, depending on in Aotearoa culturally, you know, we might learn some kupu Māori, pronunciation, you know, some important dates. So we bring in some other concepts as well in ways that they can engage with their whānau Māori in general. But that's enough.
If I could sort of come back to that and to the restoration and the healing, I suppose one of the amazing things for our organisation, well, I think it's quite an amazing thing, is the wairuatanga aspect that we have as a value of our organisation. Also that whaitaka whakaoranga whānau, the takarangi, everything is wairua itself. So when we have a look at healing and restoration, that sort of falls in under that space. So each therapist is also able to go in and understand and try and feel wairua as to where perhaps some of the healing may need to come. And so for myself as the kaumātua for the organisation, I've been called in many times to come in and do some healing, our wairua nei, through a spiritual aspect, looking through spiritual eyes and using the tikanga Māori to be able to do that and to start a healing process, the restoration, taking whānau back to marae, placing them back into their iwi, back to tribal councils or tribal groups. And so I think that this is one of the amazing things of this particular pilot that we have, or this kaupapa that we have within our organisation, is that we're able to do that and have kaumātua who can come in and have a look at and start the healing process, if need be, in that wairua aspect and whakapapa. Reconnecting, of course, our people and our families back to who they are, back to their maunga, back to their awa, back to their waka, back to their hapu iwi, because a lot of our whānau are disconnected through colonisation. And so I think that this is one of the great things around whaitaka whakaoranga whānau, is that it enables us to be able to do that, that it grants us permission to speak with kaumātua, to speak with people, and how we're able to be to do that and to reconnect and start that healing process for family. Hopefully that answered the question a little bit.
Can I lean on in here and just to add to what Matua just said, and also from a Pacifica framework context. So one of the things that really stood out for us about the Uputawa framework was how it came to being, and the way in which, the context in which Dr. Byron Sayuli had developed the Uputawa framework from. And he took it back to the fact that he had had been asked to go back to Samoa at the time of the tsunami, a few months after the tsunami, actually, to help the families and the leaders that were noticing that the young people, the young men and the young and the men that were directly having to respond to the devastation at the time it happened, that they were behaving very differently and in ways that were not in line with who they were as individuals. That and so what then happened was Byron spent a lot of time with the young men and the leaders, and they discovered that there was a lot of turmoil that was an unaddressed trauma that was experienced by these young men. And so they worked through a process of healing and restoring of the mana and the sense of identity and belonging that the young people and the young men were needing to get to. And so what the Upatawa framework really, the steps of the engagement of the Upatawa really allows for is creating that space in which that healing and that restoration can happen from a culturally safe and responsive way. And also recognizing that for Pacifica people, the psychological and the emotional elements of their well-being are often overlooked and not spoken about. And so drawing on those pillars of well-being and bringing it into the therapeutic process that the model allows to happen was part of focusing in on that healing and restoration. Tai lava.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Cynthia. There are a few comments, I think, just sort of highlighting those who are attending, their sort of appreciation of how you've worked to weave the different sort of frameworks together, while also sort of maintaining that integrity and enhancing the strength of the practice that you deliver. And then there's a particular question that I'll just raise now, asking if you could provide an example of how you would use that framework with our mixed ethnic young people and families, and recognising how you sort of bring those frameworks together. And if someone could sort of talk through a specific example, that'd be great.
Jen, do you want to have a go?
I think it's a really, really good question. And there's often here in the context here in Aotearoa where you may have younger people in the family who are kind of first generation born in New Zealand, whilst their parents and other important family members have, in a Pacifica context, come from, one of the island kingdoms. And so in that space, it can often be very difficult to find a platform where everyone feels connected and heard and understood. And there's often a sense of what is our identity and how does that play out within the values and the tikanga within the home. And so I think by coming in with some cultural support, some cultural supervision and understanding of that particular culture, we're able to, I guess from an FFT perspective, match to both the parents. Let's say it's an example with some parents and a kid. We're able to match to them and I guess honour and be mana enhancing in the way that we are kind of having conversations with them and trying to understand the problem from their perspective, whilst also really trying to have a strong balanced alliance with that young person. And so FFT really asks therapists to step into a space of honouring culture, honouring tikanga, honouring processes. That's just a really, really cool part of the model. So we go in and we do that. But when you're working in a family or a group context, you have to kind of demonstrate to all the people in that family that you are trying to hear from their perspective. You're trying to acknowledge the way that they see the world. And so by trying to use or create a balanced alliance with all those family members and the young person, I think we're able to kind of work in that kind of space and I guess create a stronger family connection. I don't know if I'm answering that question. super well, or if anyone else wants to jump in.
We can go on to our, that was a great answer, thank you. We've got another question here asking if you have any suggestions or key learnings for how other agencies could use the same model of engagement with statutory organisations that you've applied. And I think that also goes to that, you said at the start of your presentation, some of that sort of success in working with police, corrections and Oranga Tamariki. Those are the learnings that you've gained from that. If you could sort of share a bit about that and how others might be able to adopt that sort of similar approach to get the success that you've achieved.
I suppose that's mine, is it? Get a Phyllis would be my advice, because those are great. And everyone in this group will know what I mean by that, and probably quite a few people in the audience too. But I think for us, you know, as having I think we had a government organisation that was as passionate about this as we were, and so has really driven engagement inside their sector, and across the other agencies has really strongly advocated for that. So having a really strong cheerleader internally somewhere where there's some clout is possibly the best thing you can have on your side. So I suppose that's a bit of a challenge to government agencies internationally. You can make these things happen if you drive it. And then just setting the scene from the very beginning. So Pita did a lot of really amazing kōrero with the cultural advisors internally across all of the agencies that we worked with. And I think that really set the scene for a partnership going forward about, you know, it kept us all really, really squarely focused on that rangatahi and whānau were the centre of everything we were doing. And the purpose of this was to be innovative and support groups that hadn't been supported before. So there was no power imbalance from the beginning, and I think that made a huge difference with how you set the scene to it is really, really important. So when Pita talked about the whakapapa of the model coming in, you know, the processes to setting things up and the intention of everyone clearly being on the table from the get-go really settles the process to one that can be fruitful going forward. And, you know, those agencies have been fantastic to work with, and we've all learned a lot about each other. I've learned a lot that I did not know about corrections, hugely. So it's just, I think it's worked really beneficially for everyone to have that exposure.
Excellent. We're just in our sort of last minute and a half. Just on that, as a follow-up, I think one of the outcomes of having a really successful relationship with those other agencies can mean that your referrals go up quite significantly, and you might have not necessarily the space or the counsellors and the support in place to support the number of referrals coming in. Have you encountered that, and how have you managed that?
Yes, we have. And again, I recommend getting this. She's probably cringing right now. But what we did is we started with quite a narrow criteria for referral. So we started really carefully and cautiously with the agreement of everyone around the table. And then we expanded that to be more inclusive as capacity allowed. And I do recommend that because, you know, it's really great to get everyone on board, but if suddenly they're referring and you can't take their referrals, then quickly they lose interest in the service. So making sure you kind of under-promise and over-deliver, or try to, but then also make sure you have that conversation about what are the barriers and what actually is going on, so that can be shared back within the agencies that are referring is important.
That's brilliant. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you again for sharing your presentation with us, and thank you all for attending today's session. That was fantastic. And